I'm Carole Leathem, and you're listening to the Caretakers Journey podcast. Today, we are reviewing chapters 11 and 12 of my book, Are You Ready to Find Joy When Life Gets Messy? Chapter 11 is called When It's Time to Reset. Has your cell phone ever locked up on you? Well, one afternoon mine did, and I was having a really hard time trying to figure out what to do, and so I went to my computer and I Googled hard reset. So I went through the motions of doing a hard reset because that was the only way I was going to get it working again. And as I watched the screen of my phone go through the reset cycle, I began to think about the things going on in my life and how I could really wish I could do a hard reset on myself at that moment. When caretaking gets hard and you're on overload, your emotions are all over the place, exhaustion is setting in, it's time for a hard reset on life. Isolation is my go-to behavior. You've heard me say this before. When I hit the point of needing a hard reset on life, you're going to find that I'm going to find that I'm pulling away from everyone. I'm not reading my scripture. I'm not listening to worship music. I'm turning my phone off so people can't reach me. I stop checking email. I'm not sleeping. I'm not getting off the couch. I'm not taking a shower, and I'm eating too less or too much. I need a hard reset. And if you identify with me in any way, you need one too. I admit that sometimes it feels like I'm having an out of body experience because I'm watching myself isolate. I know it's not healthy, but I can't seem to stop it. I wish that it was as easy as just pushing a few buttons on my phone to do a hard reset on my life, but it isn't. So, how do I do a hard reset? Well, for me, it's spending time with my 7 grandchildren. Yeah, I have 7. They range in age from 18 down to 3. I have every age group represented in my grandchildren. And when I am laughing and playing with them, I am not thinking about anything but that moment. I'm enjoying the love and the fun of the known and putting my scary, dark questions about the unknown out of my mind. In December, I got to go to Disneyland with my son and his wife and the 4 children. We had a blast. I had not been to Disneyland for 4 years, and walking through the park with these little ones holding my hands and so excited because this was really the first time 3 of them remembered being there. It was so fun, and I was in the moment doing a hard reset on my life. Basically, a hard reset is looking inside at my emotions, taking my emotional temperature, and then making a choice. A few weeks ago, I was in Milwaukee and I got up one morning to make a cup of coffee and I pushed the button on the machine and nothing happened. Well, I waited for a few hours. I was so sad because I was sitting there on the couch and then I realized that some of the outlets were also off. And I figured out that I must have flipped a breaker or something. And I didn't want to wake my sister off. So as I was sitting there in the dark, not drinking coffee, waiting for her to wake up, you know what that feels like, I realized that my emotions were starting to get out of control because of some things that I was dealing with during that trip and my mom. Well, once my sister got up, we had to physically search and find the box. She didn't know where it was, and we had to flip the switch back on. Well, a hard emotional reset is kind of like that. We have to flip this internal switch. I have to get off the couch. I have to go for a walk. I have to get into the shower, and I have to turn on my when my life gets scary playlist in my phone, or I have to open my scripture to read. Any one of those things is a start of a hard reset. Well, in December, I tell you, I love Disneyland. We walked through those gates, and like I said, I hadn't been there since the beginning of COVID. It was a beautiful day of laughter with my 4 youngest grandchildren. Did you know that we laughed all day long? Did you know that laughter is infectious and it feels so good? And it's really good for you physically and emotionally. Another way that I reset is what I call solitude time. I discovered solitude time about 15 years ago. And what I do is I set aside 4 hours, and if I can, I go to the beach. I bring a chair, coffee, Bible, journal, pen. I turn off my phone. I don't even listen to music. And the minute I step out onto the sand, I do not speak for the entire 4 hours. I don't listen to music. I just listen to the sounds around me. the waves, the gulls, the wind. Sometimes I'll pick a passage ahead of time to read while I'm there, and then I'll open my journal and just kind of ask questions and write my thoughts. But most of the time I spend just sitting there basking in the glory and presence of God's creation, listening and resetting. And if I sense that the Holy Spirit is saying something to me, I'll write it down in my journal. The reset process starts with admitting that you need it. That's step one. Then you either ask for help, you can email me and I'll tell you how to do it, or you do something that you know will help. And most of the time, I'll do both now. I will ask for help, and I will also do something that I know will help. I encourage you to find things that help you keep going and refocus and regroup and find those moments of calms and strengths. And guess what? I want you to make a reset list and post it somewhere you can find it quickly. That way, when you're prepared when you need it, because I'll tell you, I find that I need a hard reset at the moments when I have to stop. And if I had to search too hard for a list, I wouldn't do it. Or if I didn't have it written down, I would not be able to think about what to do. So let's talk about a few of the truths from this chapter. Reset says, if you don't take care of you, you can't take care of anybody else. Reset also says finding ways to laugh and have fun is a great way to reset. Resetting is like flipping the breaker switch and turning the power back on in your life. We must choose to reset. And for me, that means I have to choose to get out of isolation. We might find ourselves feeling guilty if we're finding joy and laughing while our loved one struggles, but joy and laughter are vital. In my book, I talk about in the early days when my husband was in the psychiatric hospital, my son helped me understand the importance of finding joy and laughter. He drugged me to Disneyland 3 days while my husband was in the hospital. And it was the smartest thing that I could have done because it got me out of the pain and out of the confusion. And for a few minutes, my stress was under control. Find people who inspire you. My son inspired me that week. I have friends right now who inspire me. Find those people that inspire you to live and reach out to them. Ask them for help. That's an important reset. Reset by serving and using those given gifts and talents that you have. Sometimes for me, it just means going and sitting in the nursery and holding a baby. Jesus reset by pulling away to a solitary place to pray and be alone with God. We see this all through the days of his ministry. He would do something incredibly miraculous, and then he would go away and reset by praying and being alone with God. And we need the same. We must find that place to be alone, solitude, and talk to God for an extended period of time. So here's a few sticky notes that I have written in my window. Reset. If you don't take care of you, you won't be able to take care of anybody else. That's a truth and a sticky note moment. Spend every birthday, anniversary, or just any day that you can at Disneyland. There's a cute story in the book about my grandson, Caleb. He loved The Lion King. And when he was 3, he would tell me all of these things from The Lion King. And there's a quote from The Lion King that I heard over and over and over during those early days of my husband's mental illness as I was sitting with Caleb on my lap. Rafiki, The Lion King, Rafiki from the movie The Lion King says, "The past can hurt, but the way I see it, you can either run from it or you can learn from it." Well, one day, Caleb was trying to tell me this quote, and he said, "You have to put your behind in your pants." And I looked at him and I go, "What? You have to put your behind in your pants?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's true, but what are you trying to say?" And he said, he says it. And just about that time, Rafiki says, "You have to put your past behind you. You have to put your past behind you." And my grandson, Caleb, had heard this over and over. And he's like, "You have to put your behind in your pants," which makes so much sense. It means get up off the couch, put the past behind you, put my behind in my pants, get dressed, and choose to keep going. Reset starts the minute I acknowledge that I need it. Reset helps me keep going, regroup, refocus, and find those moments of strength and calm in the messiness and chaos of my life. So here's your final to-do list from the book. Are you ready to find joy when are you ready to find joy when life gets messy? How do you take care of you? I hope you'll think about that. I hope you'll make a list of things that you're going to do to take care of you. Identify what makes you laugh. What makes you laugh? I have a friend who just sends me the craziest memes. Every day I get something silly from her and I laugh. Ask yourself if you struggle with isolation, and then how can you flip that breaker switch and get out of it? Is guilt keeping you from laughing and having fun? What do you do or where do you go to reset? Make a list, have it handy. Who inspires you to live? Get close to them and ask for help. How do you serve? If the answer is I don't, then how are you going to start? Where can you go to find some solitude, time with God? And if you need help with this, email me and I will tell you how to do it. The final chapter, chapter 12, Knee Deep in Joy. I can't believe that our time on my book is coming to a close. And it's kind of surreal for me these past few weeks as I realize this has been my life now for 10 years. Guys, why was it so hard for me to finally say those words? My husband struggles with mental illness. It took me 2 years to be able to say them out loud. Do you know that people talk about cancer, heart disease, lung disease? I have friends right now who are struggling with cancer. There are so many ailments going on out there, but it feels like to me there's still this unresolved gag order when it comes to the issues of mental health. Mental illness is a disorder of the brain, and it attacks the mind of the person who struggles. This is truth. There are many manifestations of mental illness, and they're all very dangerous because here's what they do. They change the way a person thinks about themselves, and it changes their identity. It also changes the way a person interacts with those they love. Mental illness is a disease, it's a brain disorder, and it alters their perception of reality. It changes their ability to process their thoughts and experiences, and it leaves a trail of chaos, hurt, confusion, and anger in its wake. So, how do we find joy when life is so chaotic and so messy? Well, a few days ago, a photo popped up on my social media feed. It was one of me and my son, and he had his hands on my waist, and we were standing in a field, and I was catching a ball. Okay, this is not a common occurrence for me because I am not athletically inclined. But this was the perfect example of how we find joy. I will tell you this story as I close out this episode today. That day, I was sitting in a chair on the sidelines of the park while my family was playing a game of wiffle ball. We can play some epic games. My son kept yelling across the field saying, "Mom, get out of the chair and come play with us. I'll teach you how to catch." Finally, I got up and I walked into the field. He grabbed my waist. He put me in position. The ball was hit by my son-in-law. He gently moved me, my son gently moved me with his hands on my hip into position until it was the perfect place to catch the ball. All the time behind me, he's saying, "I know you can do it. I know you can do it. Keep your eye on the ball." Well, I did catch the ball that day, and the celebration dance to was one for the books. As I sat staring last week at that photo and remembering the feeling of joy and accomplishment of catching the ball that day, I also realized that this was an indication of how you and I can find joy. See, I chose to get out of my chair that day and put myself in the game. I allowed my son to coach me and put his hands on my waist and guide me to the exact spot I needed to be in. Success and joy came that day because I was willing to accept help, and to try. That's very, very important. When I choose to get into the game, or when I chose to get into the game that day, I was doing so much more than learning to catch a ball. I was choosing joy, and I was asking for help. Even now, 10 years into our journey of dealing with my husband's mental illness, and now adding his physical illnesses to the mix, I'm still choosing joy. I'm letting some incredible people guide me and teach me and encourage me. But I have to get out of the chair and get in the game. Today, my husband's depression is controlled by medication, and the anxiety by reading, therapy, and trying to change his self-talk. Yet, I have come to the realization that this journey will probably continue for the rest of his life. I have been asked many, many times, why do you stay? That's a biggie. Why do you stay? Can you guess? Well, the reason is written on a sticky note in my window, and I will try to read it to you now. I will stay because I made a vow before God to love and honor my husband in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer, until death do us part. Nothing in those vows has changed. My joy, my love, my commitment is to God first, my husband second. The first commitment to God gives me the strength to do the second. I stay because I love my husband. I stay because I want my children and my grandchildren to know what true commitment to God, spouse, and family look like. So today might be a hard day where I'm just trudging along, trying to get through, trying not to brace and squint. Or it might be a day where I'm skipping, I'm hopping, I'm laughing. But it will definitely be a day that I am knee-deep in a mess, and the joy is going to be flowing. So let's talk about a few truths from this chapter. We have to have conversations about mental illness. That's why I do the podcast. That's why I travel all over the country talking and speaking, because we need to start talking about what mental illness looks like and what it does. Mental illness is an illness that needs to be diagnosed and treated. And mental illness is a big deal. Let me give you some statistics from 2018. 1 out of 5 people will experience mental illness. 1 out of 2 people will struggle or know someone who struggles. Mental illness is the second leading cause of death in people ages 10 to 34. Mental illness is the fourth leading cause of death in people ages 35 to 54. And during 2018, there were 2.5 times more suicides, 48,344. And then there were homicides, 18,830. We need to start facing these numbers, and we need to start attaching faces to these numbers, and we need to understand and start the conversations about how we can help the people who struggle. It is not easy, and you're never going to tell me that this is easy. Mental illness is a formidable foe, and it can be hard to find treatments and medications and therapies that will help. It can be even harder to convince our loved ones to accept the treatment, medications, therapy, and help. But you and I must accept help from our cheerleaders. And I am a cheerleader for every one of you listening, and we have to try. Let's talk about some sticky note moments. Success that day on the ball field came because I was willing to accept help and try. I stay, and this is a big sticky note right at the bottom of my computer. I stay because I made a vow before God to love and honor my husband, and nothing about those vows has changed. I stay because I want my children and grandchildren to know what true commitment looks like. And here's your final to-do list. Write down your mess in your journal and then read it out loud. Speak it into the world. I promise you that the things that are spoken are easier to understand and accept than the ones we try to bury and hide inside. Who do you talk to? I'm hoping that you're going to get to meet in a few months my therapist. I've asked her to come on and do a show with me about therapy and the importance for the caregiver. She's thinking about it. I think she'll do it. So who do you talk to? How will you start the dialogue when you're trying to have a conversation? Create your opening line. Did you know that how I start the conversation is when people ask me how I'm doing? Sometimes I'm honest and I say, well, it's a rough day. Or if I'm meeting someone for the first time and they ask me what my husband does for a living, I'll say, well, before he was forced to retire, he was a pastor. And then people will usually lean in and say, what do you mean forced to retire? Who are your cheerleaders? Who are your Dianes? Who are your Rebeccas? Who are your Kimberlys? Who are those people who cheer you on? If you're sitting on the sidelines of life, what's keeping you there? Get up and get in the game. Stop and ask yourself, if you're in a difficult caregiving situation, why do you stay? It's an important question that you need to answer, and you need to write the answer somewhere so that you can see it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to be back next week, and the meaningful conversation that we are going to have next week is with my daughter and her husband. And we are going to talk about what happens. You've heard adults talk about when their adult children move back home. Well, I'm going to be talking to my daughter, Kate and Luke, next week about the topic, when the parents move in. And until then, it's all about him.